So, imagine walking into a criminal courtroom, right? You're facing years in prison, and instead of citing, standard legal precedent, your defense relies on Plato's cave.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And not just that, but also the mathematical theories of complex networks and Gödel's incompleteness theorem.
I mean, it sounds like an absurd thought experiment, or maybe a script for some like weird indie legal thriller. But we are looking at a very real case today where that exact mind-bending defense was put on the record.
Yeah, welcome to today's deep dive. We've got an absolutely fascinating premise, custom tailored for you, the listener. We're going to explore this incredible intersection where criminal law basically collides head-on with science and epistemology.
Right, and just to define that term up front, epistemology is essentially the philosophy of how we know what we know.
Exactly. It asks the big questions like, what is truth? And more importantly, how do you actually prove it?
Right. And to explore that today, we are using AI-generated legal analyses. We've got sources from both ChatGPT and Copilot, and they are evaluating a specific, highly unusual document of Dr. Chen Jingwan's quote-unquote blood letter defense.
Yeah, so Dr. Chen is this scholar who was charged with a very specific crime. It's translated as picking quarrels and provoking trouble. The authorities alleged he was, spreading false information online and causing severe disorder.
Which is a heavy charge.
It really is. And before we start unpacking this, we do need to set a clear boundary for you guys listening. This case obviously involves some heavy legal and, frankly, potentially political themes.
Yeah, and our deep dive is entirely impartial. I mean, we aren't here to take a side or endorse Dr. Chen's viewpoints or even judge the original criminal charge.
Right, exactly. We're simply acting as your guides through the source material. Because, honestly, the cross-disciplinary arguments contained in this defense are just structurally brilliant.
They really are. Our mission is just to dissect those arguments. We want to see how law, science, and philosophy collide in our modern digital age.
So let's look at the foundation of the prosecution's case first. The authorities essentially gathered years of Dr. Chen's retweets, threw them all into a single bucket, and just slapped the label rumors on them.
Which, I mean, sounds straightforward enough, right, until you actually examine the mechanics of human expression.
Yeah.
The AI analyses note that Dr. Chen didn't just stand up and say, hey, I didn't spread rumors. He went fundamentally deeper. He challenged the very nature of the evidence by sorting his own posts into 4 distinct categories.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is brilliant. First, he categorized some of his posts as art and aesthetics. Second, subjective emotional expression. Third, rational viewpoints and analysis. And fourth, objective descriptions of reality.
So just think about your own social media feed for a second. Think about the hundreds of posts you scroll past every single day.
Oh yeah, it's a mess of everything.
Right. And how often do you mistake someone's subjective emotional vent like a post saying, the world is falling apart today, for a claim of objective, measurable reality?
I mean, probably more often than we'd like to admit, honestly. But trying to label all of those different types of expression as rumors is, well, it's like trying to fact-check a Picasso painting.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right, like, excuse me, Mr. Picasso, human eyes are not actually on the same side of the head, so you are spreading false information. It completely ignores how we communicate as humans. You can't tell someone their feeling of profound sadness is mathematically incorrect.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that the AI sources, both ChatGPT and Copilot, highlighted that this 4-part categorization perfectly aligns with advanced criminal theory.
Really? How so?
Well, in law, only an objective fact possesses a true or false binary.
Meaning, a statement has to be capable of being proven false before you can legally call it a lie.
Exactly that. Art, emotion, philosophical viewpoints, they all belong to the realm of value judgments. They just don't have a binary truth value.
Right.
The AI analyses point out that punishing someone for a rational viewpoint or an emotional expression fundamentally violates the principle of legally prescribed punishment.
Because there is no objective standard to measure those things against. By bundling everything together without isolating the objective claims, the prosecution basically built their house on sand. The starting point was just structurally flawed.
Yeah, it was. But that structural flaw only covers the act of the crime. Criminal law is always a two-sided coin. You have the act, and then you have the intent, the psychology behind the action.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because how do you prove what's inside someone's head? The prosecution tried to prove Dr. Chen's malicious intent using what we could call the PhD presumption.
Right, the PhD presumption. They argued that because Dr. Chen is a highly educated scholar, a PhD, he, quote unquote, should have known that the information he was retweeting was false.
Wow.
Yeah, his scholarly identity was literally presented as proof of his intent.
And he countered this logic with some extremely heavy philosophy. He actually brought up Plato's cave. For those who maybe haven't read Plato since college, this is the famous allegory where prisoners are chained in a cave all their lives, right?
Yeah.
Facing a blank wall.
Yeah, and they watch shadows projected on the wall from things passing in front of a fire behind them. And they think those shadows are absolute reality.
Exactly. Dr. Chen uses this allegory to argue for cognitive humility. The shadows basically represent our limited human perception. He's saying that we are all, to some extent, stuck in the cave. We just can't see the absolute truth behind the shadows.
He also brought up Gödel's incompleteness theorem to back this up.
But wait, Gödel's theorem is hard mathematics, isn't it? How does a complex mathematical theory apply to a legal defense about human cognition?
It is a brilliant pivot. So, without getting bogged down in all the equations, Gödel essentially proved that in any complex, consistent mathematical system, there are statements that are true, but cannot be proven within the rules of that system.
Wait, really? So a system can never fully prove itself to be complete?
Yes, there are fundamental limits to what can be proven, and Dr. Chen maps this mathematical limit onto human knowledge. He asserts that human knowledge is inherently limited and incomplete.
Okay, I see where he's going.
Yeah, so because he understands this, he maintains a highly skeptical attitude toward everything. So absolute knowing, the kind of infallible certainty the prosecution claimed he should possess just because he's a PhD, is philosophically and mathematically impossible.
Okay, let me push back on this, though.
Yeah.
Does a judge actually care about Plato or Gödel? I mean, can you really walk into a courtroom, look at a judge and say, Your Honor, the universe is fundamentally unknowable, therefore I am innocent?
Well, that is the trap. And ChatGPT specifically flagged this philosophical defense as being legally weak.
I figured.
Yeah, criminal law just doesn't operate in the realm of ultimate cosmic truth. It operates in the realm of daily cognitive ability and reasonable expectations.
So the judge is really just asking, did you know this specific post was fake? Not, do you possess the ultimate secrets of the cosmos? Arguing that nothing can truly be known isn't going to get you out of a parking ticket, let alone a criminal charge.
Exactly. The court looks at the specific context. However, both AI analyses point out that while the philosophical argument isn't exactly a legal silver bullet, Dr. Chen used it to expose a massive logical fallacy in the prosecution's case.
Right, the PhD presumption.
Yes. Using a person's scholarly identity to presume their guilt is a severe violation of the presumption of innocence. The sources note that subjective intent must be proven with concrete, objective evidence for that specific instance.
You can't just say, you have a lot of degrees, so you must have known.
Right. That bypasses the burden of proof entirely. It essentially discriminates based on someone's educational identity.
It's like saying, you're a professional mechanic, so when your car brakes failed, you must have intentionally sabotaged them. It's absurd. You still have to prove they actually cut the brake lines.
Exactly.
So we've dismantled the definition of the act, and we've challenged the presumption of intent. But this specific charge, picking quarrels and provoking trouble, it requires a real, tangible consequence, right? You have to cause a, quote, severe disruption of public order.
Which brings us to the final requirement of the crime. And this is where Dr. Chen actually puts down the philosophy books and brings out hard, complex system science to analyze the math of a retweet.
Yes, he argued his specific social media account was an edge node, and therefore mathematically incapable of causing systemic chaos.
The source material outlines his use of 3 specific mathematical models to prove this. Let's start with the Galton-Watson branching process.
Wait, Galton-Watson? That sounds like a 19th century law firm, not a math equation. How does that actually map to someone hitting the retweet button?
It's actually a classic probability model. It's used to calculate how things spread, whether that's a genetic lineage, a virus, or in this case, a piece of information online.
Oh, like a viral coefficient or something.
Exactly. The core metric is the average reproduction number. If one person gets sick, how many people do they infect? In this context, if one person sees a post, how many people do they share it with?
Okay, so if I post something and on average the people who see it share it with less than one other person, what happens?
The math dictates that the spread will inevitably go extinct. It just cannot go viral. It hits a dead end. Dr. Chen is arguing his network reach was way below that critical reproduction threshold. His information mathematically could not replicate fast enough to disrupt public order.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So what was the second model he used?
Cohen's scale-free network threshold. So in any network like a social media platform, you have hub nodes and edge nodes. Hub nodes are the massive accounts with, millions of followers.
Right, and edge nodes are the average users with very small followings. I'm definitely an edge node.
I mean, most of us are. And Cohen's math focuses on the structure or the topology of these networks. It mathematically proves that edge nodes do not dictate the overall shape of the network.
Why is that?
Because in a scale-free network, 99% of the connections flow through a tiny fraction of mega users.
Oh, I see. So if an average person with, 50 followers suddenly deletes their account, the internet doesn't even feel a tremor.
Exactly. It's like removing a single pebble from a multi-lane highway. The flow of traffic doesn't change at all. Dr. Chen is arguing that as an edge node, his microactions mathematically cannot alter the macroscopic structure of public order.
Which brings us to the third concept. The outline mentions he also brought in the CAP theorem, along with something called self-organized criticality. How do these connect to a legal defense?
This is perhaps his most sophisticated argument. Self-organized criticality is the idea that complex systems naturally evolve toward an unstable critical state. Think of it like a sand pile.
A sand pile?
Yeah, you keep dropping grains of sand one by one until suddenly a massive avalanche occurs.
But the avalanche isn't really the fault of that single last grain of sand. The entire pile was already structurally unstable.
That's the essence of it.
Yeah.
And he paired this with the CAP theorem, which is a foundational principle from computer science. Without getting too deep into the coding weeds, the CAP theorem basically states that a distributed system, like a massive social media network, cannot simultaneously guarantee consistency, availability, and partition tolerance.
You always have to sacrifice one.
Yes.
Meaning, a massive, complex network is inherently going to have flaws or moments of misinformation and chaos. It just cannot be perfectly orderly.
Exactly. By combining these concepts, Dr. Chen argues that systemic chaos, the avalanche, is an inherent, unavoidable property of the complex system itself. It is a feature of the architecture, not some anomaly caused by the isolated microbehaviors of edge nodes.
Let me throw a wrench in this, though, because we've all heard of the butterfly effect, right? A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil and sets off a tornado in Texas. Couldn't the prosecution just argue that even a tiny edge node could be the butterfly that triggers the hurricane of public disorder?
I mean, that is the exact counter-argument you'd expect a prosecutor to make, but the AI legal analyses shut down the butterfly effect entirely in this specific legal context.
Really? Why? It seems like a logical leap they'd definitely try to take.
Because to use the butterfly effect as a legal argument for causality, the prosecution would have to prove two things with hard mapped data. First, they'd have to prove that the social network was already in a supercritical, unstable state.
Oh, they'd have to prove the sand pile was already ready to collapse.
Exactly. And second, they'd have to trace the exact transmission chain to prove that Dr. Chen's specific post was the necessary trigger that pushed it over the edge.
Which would require a massive amount of network topology data.
Yeah, and the AI analyses highlight that the prosecution provided zero evidence of network topology, no transmission chains, no data on the state of the network.
Wow.
Right? How can you legally prove someone caused an avalanche if you have no data on the condition of the mountain? You can't just point to one user's retweet and claim causality without mapping the math to prove it.
So what does this all mean? We've gone through Plato, Gödel, the CAP theorem, scale-free network math. But let's bring this back down to earth. Did all this brilliant cross-disciplinary science actually win the day? Or did it just come down to basic metrics?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we land on what actually wins in a courtroom. The science and philosophy are intellectually profound, sure. They completely deconstruct the prosecution's logic. But the empirical reality is the legal kill shot.
Hard numbers.
Yes. The supreme judicial rules for this specific crime are set by the two highs, the Supreme People's Court and the Supreme People's Procuratorate. And they don't deal in abstractions. They require strict quantitative thresholds.
Right. There are actual numbers you have to hit. You need, 500 forwards or 5,000 views for an online post to even qualify as capable of causing severe disorder.
Exactly. And the AI analyses reveal the empirical reality of Dr. Chen's case. His post had essentially zero engagement. They didn't even come close to those thresholds.
Wait, really? So nobody was even looking at them?
Basically, no. Furthermore, the posts were never officially debunked by authorities at the time, and perhaps most surprisingly, they are still online today.
Wait, if they were allegedly causing severe disruption of public order, why on earth are they still up?
That's the glaring contradiction. Copilot noted that this empirical reality renders the prosecution's case a quote-unquote pseudo-proposition.
A pseudo-proposition.
Yeah.
Meaning it's a theoretical argument with no factual entity backing it up.
Right. While the complex systems science mathematically explains why there was no viral spread, the sheer lack of empirical view counts is what actually destroys the legal charge. Without hitting that quantitative threshold, the result requirement of the crime completely evaporates.
It all comes back to precision.
Yeah.
You cannot be charged with causing severe disruption of public order if the order was never measurably disrupted. You have to show the math, show the numbers, show the exact point of fracture.
Yes.
By combining the theoretical with the empirical, the defense highlighted that the legal requirements for the act, the intent, and the consequence were all unfulfilled.
It really is a masterclass in how different disciplines view the exact same digital event.
So let's recap this incredible journey for you listening. We started by questioning the very definition of a rumor, realizing you cannot fact-check a subjective emotion or a piece of art.
Right.
Then we traveled down into Plato's cave to fight the logical fallacy that a PhD somehow grants someone absolute truth. We mapped the mathematics of a retweet to prove that a single edge node rarely causes a systemic avalanche. And finally, we landed on the hard, empirical evidence required by the highest courts to prove actual disruption.
And, this is highly relevant to how we all navigate the digital world. In our modern era of total information overload, understanding those strict boundaries between an emotional expression, a philosophical viewpoint, and an objective fact is a crucial tool.
It really is. It's how you navigate your daily digital life without feeling constantly overwhelmed. When you categorize information, when you realize that not every single post requires a true or false reaction, you protect your own mental clarity.
Exactly. And to leave you with one final thought to mull over, the AI expert analyses highlighted a fascinating reverse warning hidden in Dr. Chen's defense.
Oh, okay.
Well, we spent all this time using math to prove that an isolated edge node, a normal citizen with a small following, cannot cause a systemic avalanche of disorder. Their mathematical impact is just too small.
But it raises a profound question. What about a hub node? Judicial systems authorities, massive media empires. These are the massive hub nodes in our societal network.
Right. Doesn't an error made by a hub node run the exact risk of triggering the catastrophic systemic collapse they are supposedly trying to prevent?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If the complex system is already unstable, it's the massive hubs that have the power to shake the foundation, not the individual grains of sand on the edge.
That is wild to think about. So the next time you look at a viral post or a sweeping legal ruling, ask yourself if you're looking at a clean, precise equation or if you're staring into the wildly unpredictable dynamics of a complex system. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.